Today we are going to cover Vedic period, which is from 1500 BC till 600 BC, and we can divide it into two periods, that is the early Vedic period and the later Vedic period. The early Vedic period is from 1500 BC till 1000 BC, and the later Vedic period is from 1000 BC till 600 BC. Historians have divided this period into two at the time period around 1000 BC. This classification or this division was done mainly because there were the society, the culture, the religion, the ruling, all these factors were different in both these stages. Though the people who ruled the history, political and other history was in continuation, but still many features of the society was different in these two periods, mainly because of something that had happened around 1000 BC. That we will see separately. So in each period, that is the early Vedic period and the later Vedic period, we have to look in depth the different features of the society. So mainly we will be looking into three different features of the society. That will be namely the social aspects of the society, the ruling nature of the community or the polity of the time period, and the religion. Using these three topics, we will be covering the features of the early Vedic period as well as the later Vedic period. So first we are going to study the early Vedic period. Okay, early Vedic period. And the question is, what exactly is the Vedic period? Vedic period can be defined as the period when the Vedas were compiled. As the name indicates, when the Vedas or the Vedic text were compiled. It's a period during which the important Vedic texts were compiled. Who had compiled these Vedic texts? They were a group of people known as Aryans who had migrated to India around 1500 BC. So the Vedic period is the period during which the Vedic texts were compiled, or they can also be defined as the period in which the Aryans had migrated to India. So we have to look into who are the Aryans, as well as we have to see the Vedic text. Okay. Who are the Aryans? The Aryans were a group of nomadic people who had migrated to India around 1500 BC. The entire Aryan people had not come to India in a single stretch, because these nomadic people were living in small tribal groups. There were numerous tribal groups of Aryans. So what exactly is meant by the term nomadic? Nomadic means a person or a group of people, whoever it is, will be traveling from one place to another basically in search of food and water. And most of the tribal groups during that period, during ancient history period as well as medieval history period, were nomadic. Most of the tribal groups were usually nomadic, meaning these tribal group, their main occupation was cattle rearing. They were rearing or domesticating animals that gave them either milk or meat, or sometimes even birds that gave them eggs. So mostly they domesticated animals like the cattle for their food, and the cattle that gave them the food was their main source of income, not only income, the main source of their wealth as well. Okay, so these people became nomadic in the first place because the places where they had originally lived were maybe having deserty conditions with less rainfall. The places where they used to live had large stretch of grasslands. Because of less rainfall, there were few trees, and the vegetation that grew there were grasslands. And because of lack of rainfall as well as the lack of rivers, the probability or the possibility to do cultivation was much less for these people. And hence, for meeting the requirements of their food, they had to depend on cattle. The cattle can be easily domesticated and reared because there was a lot of grasslands there. They can let out the cattle in the grasslands and they will get food from there, and the humans can get food from the cattle, and hence these people just had cattle as their main, cattle rearing as their main occupation, and they got their food from there. So they had very little cultivation also because of lack of rainfall and lack of presence of rivers. Hence, people in Central Asia, people in Iran region, those regions which were dry and kind of having grasslands, had their main occupation as cattle rearing. So once the cattle is eating all the grass here, they will take the cattle to another place where they will get food and water for the cattle, and from there they will be moving to another place. So they were not having a permanent residence. Hence, they lived as nomadic people. They lived in tribal groups. They lived together in groups of tribes. One group of people became one tribe, and they had a group. They would be having a group leader. So like that, there will be numerous tribal groups. For each tribal group, their main wealth was the cattle that they had. The cattle that they had. Those cattle gave them the food. And there were different tribal groups. Mostly the tribal groups will be having, such tribal groups will be having war between them for getting more wealth. The wealth during that period was cattle. One tribal group will come and attack another tribal group and take their cattle. And this tribal group will again go and attack them and get back their cattle, or maybe they will be taking the other tribes' cattle as well. And hence during those periods, the people were living in as tribes. They were nomadic and their main occupation was cattle rearing. And during that period, the main wars that they had fought were also for cattle. Their main wars were also for cattle, which is their wealth. So Aryans were one such tribal group in the world at that time. We don't know where the Aryans came from. The Aryans, the theory relating to the initial source or the birthplace of the Aryans are still disputed among the historians. The historians could not come to a common conclusion. Some people said that they came from the Arctic region, the cold region in the extreme north. Some people said that they came from, if this is the world, some people said they came from the Arctic region. Some people said that they came from the Central Asian region. Some people said they came from the European region. Some people said they came from the Mongolian region. So the historians cannot come to a conclusion from where they had come actually. But anyway, wherever their initial source was, people, some of the tribals or some of these Aryan tribal group had lived in ancient Iranian region or ancient Persian region. From the Iranian region, they had come to India. From the Iranian region, they had come to India through northwest India. And hence, they had met the Indus Valley people and could have had wars or conflicts with the people in the Indus Valley civilization. So, the historians has come to a common conclusion that they had migrated to India through northwest India from the Iranian region around 1500 BC. There were numerous tribal groups, numerous Aryan tribal groups in Iranian region. These tribal groups came to India in their groups. Like not everyone came together. Around 1500 BC, different tribal groups came to India. That is how historians have now come to a conclusion. So the next question is, so how do we know that the Aryans came to India from the Iranian region? One of the ancient texts in the world and the ancient text in India was the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda was part of the Chatur Vedas or the 4 Vedas. These were the 4 ancient Vedic textbooks or the Chatur Vedas. These are not the only Vedic texts. There were other Vedic texts as well. During the Vedic period, 4 sets of Vedic texts were written. Of them, the first set was the Vedas. Among these Vedas, there were 4 texts. Those are the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda and the Atharva Veda. The 4 sets of Vedic texts were the Vedas. The Vedas were of 4 types. The Rigveda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda and the Atharvaveda. And the other Vedic texts were the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas and the Upanishads or Vedantas. Upanishads or Vedantas. These were the 4 sets of Vedic texts that were compiled during the Vedic period. After this also there were again some more Vedic texts which were compiled during the later period. And the other Vedic texts that were compiled after the Vedic period were the great epics. Ramayana and Mahabharata. Epics or Idihasas, the great stories. There were the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. They were also considered as Vedic texts. And the other set of Vedic texts were the Puranas. So these were the Vedic texts. Out of these Vedic texts, the first 4, the Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas and Upanishads were compiled during the Vedic period. And the rest of them, the epics and the Puranas were compiled during the subsequent period till the Gupta period. These texts were compiled. Okay. Then out of the 4 Vedas, out of the 4 Vedic texts, the first one is the Vedas, which is of 4 sets of textbook: the Rigveda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, and the Atharvaveda. Out of these Vedas, the only Veda and the only Vedic text that was written during the early Vedic period was the Rigveda. Remember this? The only Vedic text and the only Veda that was compiled during the early Vedic period was the Rigveda. And hence the early Vedic period is also known as the Rigvedic period. The rest of the Vedas and the rest of the 3 Vedic texts were compiled during the later Vedic period. The Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda and the Brahmanas, Aranyakas and the Upanishads or Vedantas were compiled during the later Vedic period. During the class of the art and culture, we will be covering the Vedic text in detail. What all things are inside there, what exactly are the subject content and everything we will be covering in the art and culture class. So just now we will be only learning the names of the Vedic text. Okay. So Rigveda is considered as the ancient text, one of the ancient texts written in the world. And it is also the first book that is discovered in India. The first book that was compiled in India was the Rigveda. Zoroastrianism was the ancient religion of Iran region, or the ancient religion of the old Persian region was Zoroastrianism. And the religious text of Zoroastrianism was known as Zend-Avesta. According to historians, the Aryans had come from the Iran region to India. How did they know it? It is from the simple evidence that some of the words that were seen in the Rigveda. The Rigveda, remember the Rigveda was compiled by the Aryans. Some of the words seen in Rigveda, the names of gods, some animals, the practice of fire worship, all these things that were seen in the Rigveda were in common with the Zend-Avesta. The name of some gods, the name of some animals, the practice of worshipping fire, all these features were seen in common in the Rigveda as well as the Zend-Avesta, which means that it must have been the same kind of people who had written the Rigveda and the Zend-Avesta. That is how the historians came to the conclusion that around 1500 BC, the Aryans who had come to India had actually come from the Iran region. Okay, so there was this god called Purandara. Purandara, who is also known as the breaker of forts. The meaning is the breaker of forts, the god who had broken forts. Forts are protected buildings with a tall wall. We have seen forts as tourist spots nowadays, tourist places nowadays, right? It was a structure in which there was an outer, there was a tall outer wall inside which there were so numerous buildings like palaces, like small buildings for army people and all that. And those protected palace like buildings were known as forts. So Purandara is known as the god who had broken forts, who helped the army to break forts, is what the word actually means. So this name was seen in common in the Rigveda as well as the Sendavastha. This Purandara later became the god that we famously known as god Indra. It is the same god. The Purandara later became the Indra. The Indra who is the god of rain, thunder, lightning, who is also known as Purandara or the breaker of forts. So this name was seen both in Rigveda as well as Sendavastha. So these kind of evidences, the names of many animals like goat, sheep, etc. Then gods, the name of gods like Purandara, Agni, etc. Then the worship of fire. All these things were seen in common with the Zoroastrianism in the Sendavastha as well as in Rigveda. Okay. In the Vedic period, the Vedic texts were written, and the major source of information about the Vedic period were the Vedic text. And during the early Vedic period, the only Vedic text that was compiled was the Rigveda. The Rigveda had a lot of contents, and that was the main source of our information about the early Vedic period. And in the Rigveda, it was mentioned that the Aryans had come to Indian region, and they had wars with the indigenous people, meaning the people who had already lived here. The Aryans had battles with them, and they had defeated most of them. And the indigenous people were known as Dasas and Dasyus in the Vedic text. So in the Vedic text, it is mentioned that the Aryans who had come to India had defeated the indigenous people who were the Dasas and Dasyus and had started ruling over them. The same Vedic text had said that the word Aryans means the people who were born of very high race, or the high-born people. The people who were born out of a high human race were called as Aryans, or the high-born people were called as Aryans. They had difference. The Aryans had difference between the Aryans themselves as well as the indigenous people who were here. They did not have any good impression about the indigenous people who were there. So they always tried to defeat them and always tried to keep them as slaves, is what we have come to know from the Rigveda. As we already mentioned, the Aryans were nomadic people. They traveled from one place to another. The main occupation was cattle rearing, and hence they can be called as pastoral people. Pastoral means they always lived on pastures or green lands or grasslands where they were looking after or rearing their cattle. So these people, their main wealth was cattle, because they were the things that gave them food. So hence their wealth was cattle. And hence there were different tribal groups, and these tribal groups always fought with each other for each other's cattle. The wars that they had fought were basically for cattle. Okay. And hence there were different tribal groups. Like that, the Aryans came to India in different tribal groups. Different tribal groups came to India over a long period of time, around 1500 BC. When they had came here, it is mentioned that they had defeated the indigenous people. But also the Aryans, since they always had to move from one place to another, and always they had war between each other, they had two important things with them. Those two important things had helped them to defeat the indigenous people and establish their rule in India. And what were those two important features that the Aryans had? The two major things that the Aryans possessed and that had helped them were, one, they knew how to make good weapons, and they knew how to use these weapons. They had used so many weapons like the swords, spears, etc. because they had always had to protect their tribe and protect their cattle from other tribal groups. So from olden days, they knew how to make weapons and how to use weapons. And the second thing was they were always in movement. They had to move from one place to another, taking their cattle with them. But since they were staying in one place, the cattle will be eating all the grass there. Once that is finished, they will have to take the cattle to another place where there is grass as well as water. So they were always constantly on motion or constantly moving from one place to another. And hence they did not want to walk. And hence they started making chariots. Chariots means carriages or rathas that we can say in our Indian culture. Hence they made chariots made out of wood. So how did they make the chariots move? They used swift moving horses. They used swift moving horses. And hence from olden days they reared horses along with the cattle. From olden days, the Aryans knew how to rear or grow good variety of horses, how to have children out of horses, how to breed good breeds of horses, and how to use them. From olden days, they bred or reared. Bred means to look after them and make them have good kids. So from olden days, they bred good varieties of or swift moving varieties of horses, and they used horses for transportation. They either traveled on top of the horses or they used chariots attached to horses to move. And hence from olden days they had weapons as well as swift moving horses and chariots made out of wood. These two things made them a superior race. They can easily travel from one place to another. They can easily attack someone. They can easily defend themselves. They can easily win wars because they were swift moving and they had weapons. And these must have been the two reasons that had helped them to establish their role in India. So from the Rig Veda, we come to know that the Aryans who had came to India had two kinds of wars. The Aryans usually had two kinds of wars. The first war was with the indigenous people, the Dasas and the Dasyus. The first war was with the indigenous people, and the second war was among themselves. The different Aryan groups fought with each other. So, from Rig Veda we came to know that out of all the Aryan tribal groups that came to India, there were 5 major Aryan groups. 5 powerful big tribal groups were there. 5 major Aryan groups were there that came to India. There were numerous Aryan tribal groups that came to India. Out of them, 5 were major, strong and powerful groups. Okay. There was this very famous tribal war in the history of the Aryans during the Vedic period. And that battle was known as the Battle of 10 Kings. The Battle of 10 Kings, also known as the Dasrajan War. The Dasrajan War. Rajan means king. Das means 10. 10 king. Battle of 10 Kings. The Dasrajan War or the Battle of 10 Kings was one of the famous battles fought among the Aryans in the early Vedic period history. Out of all the Aryan groups who came to India, the head of one tribal group was called as Bharata. He was a strong Aryan king who had fought a war against 10 kings. He had fought against 5 Aryan tribal groups and 5 non-Aryan tribal groups. 5 non-Aryan tribal groups. So hence that makes it as 10 tribal groups. So this king and his group had fought against 10 different groups. Together, these 10 groups had formed one huge army. They were a confederacy. They were fighting together on one side with their army, and this king fought alone with his army. And who will you think would have got victorious out of this war? We will always think that the 10 kings got victorious, but it was not like that. King Bharata and his army had won this war. The Dasarajan war was won by King Bharata and his tribal group. He was one of the strongest and powerful tribal group that had come to India. Hence, the Bharatas won the war and they had defeated the 10 kings. Out of the 10 kings, out of the 10 kings, there were 5 Aryan groups as we have discussed. Out of these 5 Aryan groups, one of the prominent Aryan groups were the Purus, the Puru clan. The Purus was one of the important tribal Aryan group of that period. The Bharatas who had defeated all of them, including Purus. But at a later point of time, Bharata enters into a matrimonial alliance with the Purus, meaning the King Bharata had married one of the Puru princes and both his family joined together. So the family of the clan of Bharata joined with the family of Purus and they became a bigger and stronger family and they took the name of Kurus, the Kuru clan or the Kuru Vamsha. The name that we had heard in Mahabharata, the Kuru Vamsha, the descendants of the Kuru Vamsha were the Pandavas and the Kauravas. That same Kuru is here. Though there was no evidence for Pandavas or Kauravas in our history, but some of the names that are mentioned in the Mahabharata, like the Kuru clan, like the capital of Kurus, which is the Indraprastha and the Hastinapur, all those places were real places and they are seen in historical records like in Rigveda. But the King Bharata was also there, but the rest of the history like the Kauravas, the Pandavas, Lord Krishna, all those people never had any historical background for them. Okay. So what happened is that the Bharata who had defeated the 10 kings went into matrimonial alliance with the Purus and later they made the new family called Kuru, the Kuru clan. At a later period of time, and out of these 5 important Aryan groups, there is another group called as Panchalas. Later the Kuru clan and the Panchalas gets into matrimonial alliance. They also join together to become a big family. All these things we have historical record. Okay. So Battle of 10 Kings is like this. King Bharata fought against 10 other kings. Out of them 5 were Aryan groups, 5 were non-Aryan groups. Non-Aryan groups are the people who were already ruling here. All these 10 people joined together to form a single army and they fought with Bharata, but they were defeated by Bharata. But later Bharata enters into matrimonial alliance with Purus and forms the great Kuru clan. The Kuru clan later enters into matrimonial alliance with the Panchalas. That is the history of the Battle of 10 Kings or the Dasarajan War. The next topic that we are going to study is the features of early Vedic period. The early Vedic period is from 1500 BC till 1000 BC and the main features can be classified into 3 headings: the polity, the society and the religion. And in polity, as we know, the society or the people who lived were basically pastoral in their activities. Their main occupation was cattle rearing. That means they were a pastoral community. So everything revolved around their economy. Okay. So they had a classification of the people on the basis of tribal groups, and those tribal groups were known as Janas. There was a temporary ruler for the Janas in times of war. In times of war, the people will select a person who is good enough to lead them in the war. The qualities that they looked for were he should be courageous and he should be a better warrior. And they will select a person and make him as the Rajan or the king. And he did ruling over the tribal group. There was no concept of land. There was no concept of the king ruling over a land. Because land was of no importance since the land was not producing anything for them. Their main source of income or their main source of food was pastoral or cattle rearing. Hence, there was no concept of kingdom, or there were no kingdoms known as Janapadas. There were no Janapadas, there were only Janas, over which the rulers made their ruling. And there were village assemblies that assisted the ruler in making decisions. And there were 4 prominent village assemblies in this period, and they were the Sabha, Samiti, Vidada and Gana. These village assemblies were a gathering, were a kind of democratic gathering where the people will choose the decisions to be taken for the ruling of the Janas. They were the people who assisted in selecting the king. They were the people who assisted the king at times of war and helped him to make decisions. So the village assemblies were prominent during early Vedic period. The society was largely pastoral and it was a patriarchal society. Both early Vedic period as well as later Vedic period is having a patriarchal society. Patriarchal society means the family is headed by a male member. So we had a patriarchal society, but still in early Vedic period there was considerable freedom for women. Women were free and they even participated in village assemblies like the Sabha and the Samiti. There were even famous female poets or poetess like Gargi. There were famous poetess in this period like Gargi. And they even participated in village assemblies like the Sabha and the Samiti. So, these are the basic features of the society. And at this period, during the early Vedic period, there were some castes in existence. These castes were basically based on the occupation. Once you change your occupation, your caste will also be changing. The main caste during those periods were the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and the Brahmanas. Sorry, it's not Shudras but the Brahmanas. Shudras were there. Shudras were the people who were considered as slaves by the rest of the caste. Okay, so these were the castes that was based on the occupation. Kshatriyas were the people who effectively went for fighting, for warfare and were selected as the rulers. The Brahmanas were the people who were conducting prayers. Those who were assisting others in conducting prayers were the people Brahmanas. And Vaishyas were the people who did all the productive work like agriculture, like trade. If you are conducting or if you are doing trade or agriculture, you will be of the caste Vaishya. If you are going for warfare, then your caste will be of Kshatriyas. If you are doing pujas and prayers, then you can be a Brahmana. So it is not. It was not based on birth. It was not rigid. It can be changed on the basis of the occupation that you did. So these were the features of the society in the early Vedic period. We can see that there is no kinds of division between the people either based on income. There was no classification based on income because there were no rich people, there were no poor people. The income or the wealth of the people was effectively cattle. So on the basis of cattle, you can't say this person is rich, this person is poor. You can't say. Hence, there was no division between people based on the wealth they had. There was no division on people based on the caste that they have because anytime you can change your caste. Hence, the society was kind of equal or egalitarian. There was an egalitarian society, an equal society without much divisions. That was how the society was in early Vedic period. And the religion means how we are worshipping which god. Why are we worshipping? We are worshipping to communicate with God, to tell what all things we need, to tell our sorrows and miseries, and to get peace. How we are worshipping or to whom we are worshipping, that decides our religion. In this period, the main job of the people were pastoral or cattle rearing. They will take the cattle and they will go out to rear on the grasslands or forest or hilltops. And there they will be meeting with rain, thunder, lightning, forest fire, and they were so much in fear of all these natural elements. And hence they considered these natural elements as gods and they worship these natural elements. The main gods in this period is the Indra, the god of thunder and lightning. He was also known as Purandara. This we came to know from the Rig Veda. All these names that we are studying here are from the Rig Veda, Rigvedic evidence. And our Indra was also known as Purandara or the breaker of forts. He was the god of thunder, lightning and rain. And his name was mentioned around 250 times in the Rig Veda. Hence we know he was the most prominent god. Then there was Agni or the god of fire. His name was mentioned around 200 times. Hence we know he was the second important god. Then there was Varuna, the god of water, whose name was mentioned around 150 times. So these were the prominent gods. There were also other gods like the Rudra and Vishnu who were not that important, but these gods were also worshipped. Rudra, the form of Shiva, who was the preserver and protector of animals, was worshipped. Then there was Vishnu, who was the preserver and protector of humans. He was also worshipped. But these gods were of less importance. So these were the effective features of the society during early Vedic period. Okay. And to make it hereditary, meaning once a person becomes a king, the next king will be that person's child. That person's son will become the next king, and that king's son will become the next king. Like that. Why can't we make it that way? These people thought, and they started to make the position of king as permanent and hereditary. Then there are some other people known as Brahmanas. They wanted to earn money easily. What they did is, they will say that if one person is going to have agriculture, when they are going to start cultivation, he will say, come, I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you so that you will get good output out of cultivation. The people will go to the Brahmanas and ask them to please pray for us so that we'll have more cultivation. If someone is going to have a child, if someone's wife is going to give birth, then they will go to Brahmanas and say, please pray to the god so that we'll get good children. The same thing even the kings do. When the king is starting cultivation, he will call the Brahmanas and ask them to do prayers. Likewise, when the king is going to have a child, he will ask them to do prayers. If the king is going for a battle, he will call the Brahmanas and ask them to do prayers. And hence, for all this, the Brahmanas will collect fees from them. Simply by sitting there and doing nothing and just chanting some mantras, they will earn money. And hence the Brahmanas say, we can only do this, no one else can do it, no one else can study this and do it. For that purpose, what the Brahmana did was that they made complicated rituals, complicated methods of doing prayers. They brought in complicated language like the Sanskrit and wrote complicated mantras in that, so that only they can read it. Only those people who had learned Sanskrit, which they will not teach anybody else. They had made Sanskrit mantras which they will only learn and which they will only teach their children, and they will only do the mantras. And they will say that they made a practice that only these mantras and only these rituals that the Brahmanas do will be effective to reach God. In order to pray to God, only these things can be done. The rest of the things, if you sit there and pray to God, like God, please help us, please give us good children, please give us good agriculture product, it will not happen. You have to chant these Sanskrit mantras. You have to do the practice like this, such rituals. Then only you will get the result. Is what they made people believe, and hence they said only we can do it. Only the children born for us can do it. And hence they made prayer as their hereditary job, and hence two castes came into existence. Again, because of this, the people who did cultivation and the children who were born to them, they can only do cultivation. They can't do these jobs. These jobs were reserved for them. Over a long period of time, the castes that were born in early Vedic period, due to the job that people had done, was changed into a different form, and now the jobs were sticking on according to their caste or birth. If a person is born to a Brahmin family, then he will become a Brahmin. It's not about your job, and you cannot change your job also. If you are a farmer, you will be of Vaishya caste, and you can only be of Vaishya caste, and your children will be of Vaishya caste, and they can only do agriculture and not become kings. And hence the caste become rigid and on the basis of birth. And then there were the indigenous people here in India, the Dasas and Dasyus. They were made as slaves, and those people were known as the Shudras. The Shudras was in existence from early Vedic period itself, but all these things became so rigid and fixed during the later Vedic period. Why? Because of to get extra wealth for people. Some people, for their greediness, had made caste system rigid and on basis of birth, so that they and their children will easily get the wealth out of the jobs that they are doing. The Brahmanas will sit comfortably and do mantras, and they will take huge fees from the other people. The kings and the ruling class will get tax money. The Vaishyas will be the main people who will be paying the tax, who will be doing actual productive activity. They will be cultivating them, meaning they will be farming, and they will be the people who will be doing trade. But the Shudras were the people who were kept as slaves. They were not let even to help in agriculture. They were not even given any kind of productive work. They were asked to only clean the house, clean the toilet, clean the drainage tank. All those such menial jobs were given to the Shudras. They were kept as slaves, and anyone above them, any caste above them can hit them whenever they need. It is written like that in the Vedas, especially Rig Veda. And in Rig Veda it said that the Vaishyas, the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas, kings or the Kshatriyas or the people who go for wars. The Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas can give 1 or 2 slaps to the Vaishyas if needed, because Vaishyas came under them only. But the other 2 castes, the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas, they were always in fight with each other to say who came the first, who is the topmost caste. The Brahmana said, only if we pray, you people become kings. But the Kshatriyas say, you people are replaceable. I can replace one Brahmanical priest with another, is what the Kshatriya kings would always say. Hence the Kshatriyas and Brahmanas always had a war with each other to see who is the first caste. Next is later Vedic period. We are going to see the features of later Vedic period, and the main features are polity, society and religion. The main occupation of the people. The main occupation of the people in later Vedic period became agriculture. And for agriculture, we need land and water. So since agriculture became the most important job, the importance of land came into existence. Land became important. If a person has more land, he can cultivate more and he can earn more. And hence the kings also started to think about lands. And hence the land boundaries or land borders became important. The king will say that his land is within so and so boundary, this land is his. And hence land boundaries became important. And hence he started to expand his land. Likewise, when 2 kings started to expand land together, they will have fight between each other for land. And hence during this period, wars were fought for land expansion. Wars were fought for land expansion. The post of king or Rajan became permanent and hereditary. The kings ruled over land called as kingdoms or Janapadas. Ruled over kingdoms, the kings ruled over kingdoms known as Janapadas. In early Vedic period, the rulers ruled over tribal groups known as Janas. Here the kings ruled over kingdoms known as Janapadas. The village assemblies lost their importance. Because the king became very powerful and he concentrated all power onto himself. He made all the decisions. The village assemblies were just there for namesake. They were just there as like rubber stamps. All the decisions were taken by the king and he made his post permanent. And he said that only my son can become the next king. And his son can become the next king. And hence, the system of ruling changed. And it was mainly over land. And all kings wanted to expand the land under them. Okay. It was mainly because the wealth making process was mainly out of agriculture, which was dependent on land. Since agriculture became the prominent occupation, there was surplus wealth generation. There was extra wealth generation in the society. This surplus wealth led to differences between people. Differences between people. One difference was the wealthy people and the poor people. And the other major difference and one of the most important social issue that had generated in India and still that is existing in India is the problem of caste system. The caste system started because of the extra wealth with some people. In order to have extra wealth always with them, they had devised a system based on caste. Different people can do only different such jobs that is associated with their birth is what they have told. Meaning there were 4 castes were developed in the country and they were the Kshatriyas, the Brahmanas, the Vaishyas and the Shudras. The 4 castes became rigid. The 4 castes were Kshatriyas, Brahmanas, Vaishyas and Shudras. The Kshatriyas were the people who conducted warfare or who became kings. The Brahmanas were the people who conducted prayers and they collected money for conducting prayers from kings and the different people when they are having cultivation, when they are having children, when they are having any disease. For everything they will be doing prayers and they will be collecting money from them. Then there are Vaishyas who were the actual taxpayers. These were the Vaishyas were the people who did all the productive activities like cultivation, like trade, etc. and paid their tax. This tax was collected by the kings and they became rich. And the Shudras were the people who were usually the indigenous people here. These were the people who were kept as slaves, kind of slaves. The Shudras were the people who were used to do the menial jobs like cleaning the houses, like cleaning drainages, like cleaning septic tanks. All those works were given to them. They were treated as slaves, they were slapped. The Shudra women were traded like slaves, they were given off like wealth. Like if there is a prayer done by a Brahmana person, then he was given fees in the form of Shudra slave women or animals as the fees. Okay, so these different kinds of caste became rigid and based on the terms of birth. On the base of birth, the caste came into existence. If a person is born in Kshatriya family, they can only be a Kshatriya and they can only go into warfare. They cannot become a Brahmana. They cannot conduct prayers. Only a person born in Vaishya can do cultivation. They cannot become Brahmana. They cannot conduct prayers. And this is how they created difference between people, and that kind of difference is still existing in our country. During the later Vedic period, women lost their importance. Women lost their freedom and they were asked to stay at home. They had to confine to the kitchen and they could not go out. They could not go out and be part of the village assemblies. They could not work. They could not come out in the society. Women lost freedom during the later Vedic period, which is still continuing in our society to an extent. Though it's changed a lot, but still in rural parts, it's a bit of it is still existing. We have to add one point in both the early Vedic period and later Vedic period, that the society is mainly patriarchal society. Patriarchal society. Meaning, the head of the family was always a male member. During early Vedic period also it was a patriarchal society. During later Vedic period also it is a patriarchal society. Meaning, always the house will be headed by the male member. And in later Vedic period in the society, we have to remember that women lost their freedom and they were asked to be confined within their houses and not go out. They cannot have education, they cannot participate in public activities. They lost their freedom basically. Okay. And the last point is religion. The requirements of the people have changed. The people have changed their main occupation from pastoral to agriculture. The community was agricultural, and hence they did not have to go out in the open, go out with the cattle in the open, and hence They were silently sitting in one place and doing agriculture. They are safe there. They were not scared of the natural elements anymore, and hence they did not give much importance to thunder, lightning, rain, wind, fire, etc. And hence their requirements changed. Now their requirement was to get more output from agriculture, more food grains from agriculture. When they are having kids, they want healthy kids. They wanted to have a good life. They wanted to have health, and hence their requirements changed, and hence the gods that they prayed also changed. The gods who were unimportant during the early Vedic period became the important gods in this period, and the gods who were important during the later period became the the gods who were the important ones in the early Vedic period became the unimportant gods in later Vedic period. And hence the prominent gods were, important gods were Rudra and Vishnu, and the other gods or the lesser prominent gods were Indra, Agni, Varuna, etc. See, the requirement of people changed, hence the way how they prayed changed, and they have even changed the gods that they had prayed to. That is how humans act, right? So these are the basic features of the later Vedic period. See, with the invention of iron around 1000 BC, the features of the society before 1000 BC and the features of the society after 1000 BC has entirely changed. So this is the basic features of the early and later Vedic period. A bit more of the topic in Vedic period is remaining, that we will see in the next class. Then we will head on to the other portions. Okay, the session is only this much. Thank you.